So when writing becomes as essential as breathing, when you cannot sleep at night because the ideas are searing in your mind, when you're always looking for a pen to jot down ideas and thoughts, writing almost becomes like an addiction or a passion that has taken on a life of its own, making it such that you don't need fancy tools or an elaborate setup, you just need the time to gather your thoughts and write. Throughout my PhD, I've taken many courses on writing, writing faster, writing better, and so on. Yet none truly taught me how to write, and more importantly, how to enjoy the process of writing, which in the end, I believe is the most important factor of writing. I remember as a kid, my friends and I would create stories together, and one of us would write these stories down. We could do this all day, and no professor had to force us to write. And I wonder, where did we find this curiosity and that endless stream of words, and can we get it back as adults to inspire our writing in the current day and age? In this video, I want to lift the veil of what I've learned during my PhD, how I cultivated the habit of writing, my favorite resources, courses, tips and tricks for becoming a better writer, and may this become your guide to becoming the best academic writer, novelist, or any type of writer that you want to be. I believe we all have thoughts worth sharing by pen, and hopefully this video will inspire you to do so. Something that has inspired me to create this video was this quote by Andy Warhol, who said, "Don't think about making art, just get it done. Let everyone else decide if it's good or bad, whether they love it or hate it. While they are deciding, make even more art." And I want to start this video by saying the most important thing about getting better at writing is to just write. So try to write as much as possible, as often as possible, and try to do it with curiosity and pleasure. But I do want to give you a few small tips and tricks that I've learned that hopefully makes this process a little bit easier. So let's get straight into it. So I've divided this video into 5 sections such that you can hop around if you find any section more interesting than another section. So the first thing is about cultivating writing as a habit, or almost as an addiction, although I don't really want to use the word addiction because that of course is quite negative, but as a habit that you really truly cannot let go. The next one is the goal of your writing, or how to set goals for your writing. The third is writing strategies. The fourth is overcoming common pitfalls and challenges, and the fifth is to embrace your writing journey. So first of all, cultivating writing as a habit. And I think the most important thing about cultivating writing as a habit, of course, is to write every day and to kind of get over the fear of writing. And something that really helped me do this is the idea of morning pages. Well, that comes from this book, and I really enjoyed this idea of morning pages. So morning pages is more of a journaling technique where as you wake up every morning and you have your coffee, for example, you write down a stream of thoughts that you're having at that moment. And the idea behind it is that you almost set up writing as a habit without any strenuous goals or any push for creativity or anything. And it just allows you to get into this habit of writing without too much pressure. So the first thing to think about is cultivating writing as a habit. And something that really inspired me to think about this more and more is the idea of morning pages. So morning pages comes from this book that I really enjoyed reading. And the idea behind morning pages is that you every morning set a dedicated time slot where you just write down your thoughts. And it's very uncomplicated and very easy to do. And it's just that you write down about 3 pages, she says, but I think you can do more or less, about the thoughts that you're having in that moment. And I think something that I realized as I started doing this is just having this small habit every day gives you the confidence that you can write even when you believe your thoughts aren't that good, because you're writing it without any goals, without any strenuous pressure on yourself. And it's just about the idea, write down anything that you think about. So that really helped me to get started on writing. Then something else of making writing a daily habit, and I especially did this at the end of my PhD, and that's to have a small word count for a project that I'm writing on. So for the last chapter for my PhD, I had so much trouble even starting writing, and that's because the last chapter was the discussion. So for the thesis, you have to write a discussion that kind of combines all your thesis work that you've written over the last 4 years. And I noticed that I put so much pressure on myself for this chapter to be perfect because I wanted it to be perfect. But of course, that's almost impossible, this goal of perfection. So something that I did is that I said to myself, I just have to write 500 words, which is about a page every day. And no matter how bad it is, no matter how disgusted I am by the words that I wrote on page, at least this got me into the habit of just writing something down every day. And I got that from the writer Rebecca F. Kwong, and I think a lot of other writers do it as well. But she wrote the Poppy Wars, and she wrote it very fast. And she said she did it by writing 2,000 words every day, no matter how bad they are. And I think keeping this advice in mind when you're working on a big writing project is just really good. The next habit that I cultivated or had is to really protect my writing time. So I think it's good to have a dedicated time slot in the day where you set boundaries around your writing. So for example, something that I did is, especially again for the end of my PhD, I would write in the morning, because for me the morning time was when I could protect my time. But for some people it may work better to write in the evening. But I would write from like 7 to 9 or from 8 to 10 before I would go to uni. And these 2 hours became really key to me for finishing my PhD. And that's because these 2 hours I didn't have any distractions. I had no friends come by, no messages almost come in. I didn't have to really be at the lab at that time. And usually I didn't have meetings. So that was really valuable for me to have this uninterrupted time. And I also want to emphasize that it doesn't have to be a really long time slot. Like, I think there are some writers online like Brandon Sanderson that have these 4-hour blocks. And I used to also have this as a student, but now as a postdoc and before that a PhD student, I quite often had meetings. So I didn't have the ability to create these 4 hours or like 5 hours of dedicated time slots for writing. But I usually did have every morning like an hour or an hour or two that I could dedicate to writing. And I think as you accumulate these little hours every day, it becomes, some really nice dedicated time for writing. Something that maybe can help you to protect your time is to also eliminate all distractions. And something that really helped me is to have this journal or this book for distractions. So during writing, you will probably want to distract yourself in countless ways. And the biggest distraction actually often doesn't come from the outside, but comes from inside of us. So these are things like, I want to look at Twitter or look something up or to get a snack. And having for these moments a small or a big notebook next to you where you write down these distractions and you put off doing these distractions for about 5, 10, or maybe 30 minutes. Quite often I found that after I put off these distractions for this dedicated amount of time, that I would forget about the distraction. I actually didn't want to do it anymore. And sometimes I still wanted to do it, and then I would allow myself after 30 minutes. But this also strengthens your ability to put off instant gratifications for these distractions. And I think slowly over time, with this almost like behavioral control, you can create the ability to put off distractions that come internally. And after a certain point, I noticed that I could put off these distractions almost indefinitely. But at the beginning, if you're training this, definitely just try to set a small goal for yourself, like put off the distraction for 5 minutes and not immediately 1 hour, because it is quite hard. I do recognize that. Something else aside from these really big time blocks is to also utilize small moments. So this is a little bit more like a lifestyle change or like a thought pattern change. So building the writing into your lifestyle, not just as one dedicated task or a block, but to have moments throughout the day where you think about your inspirations or ideas and write them down as they come to you. So I've also wrote about this or talked about this in this journaling method, but the idea is to have these pockets of free times, for example, on walks or after talks between classes, where you think about what you want to write about. So you think about creative ideas that you have. So for example, something to think about is the next paper that you want to write, a small blog post that you want to write, or if you just listen to a lecture, maybe there was a small quote that stood out to you that you can kind of riff on. And I think having these small pockets of time, so for example, when you're waiting for a train, actually allows for a little bit more creativity than when you're sitting down and having a dedicated amount of time. So something that I noticed is that my most creative ideas would usually come in these small pockets of time, and then I could really work them out in the longer writing blocks. So definitely try to have a little notebook with you, or even voice notes where you note down the thoughts you're having throughout the day, or the ideas you're having throughout the day. And this really also comes down to the exercise of concentrating the mind on something that you're thinking about. And I kind of got this from the book of How to Live on 24 Hours a Day. And I know the title is really off-putting, but I actually found the book quite nice because it's written in this old English style that I quite enjoy. And something that Arnold Bennett, the writer, said was the exercise of concentrating the mind, to which at least half an hour a day should be given, is a preliminary, like skills on the piano. Having acquired power over the most unruly member of one's complex organism, one has naturally to put it to the yoke. Useless to possess an obedient mind unless one profits to the furthest possible degree by its obedience. A prolonged primary course of study is indicated. And this almost touches upon the idea of meditation and to control one's thought patterns, but I won't really go into that because I'm not an expert or anything on this. But I do think bringing your mind back and really focusing on one topic or one idea that you're thinking about and trying to elaborate on that in these small pockets of time can really spark creativity. So the next part I want to talk about is the goal of your writing, or really why do you write? And I think we can write for various purposes, or at least I write for various purposes. And I think the differences between these purposes that you write for can really train you to become a better writer as well. So the reason I write is for a blog. So I have a blog which I will list down below for academic papers and also now for grants. And in the future, I would love to also write, for example, a book. And I think all of these writing projects have a different technique and a different style of writing. So for example, I made this video about how to write a paper, and the way you write a paper is very structured. So there's definitely an organization and a clear technique on how to write better papers. Whereas how to write a book is a little bit more miscellaneous, I would say, and a more longer dedicated writing time project, which makes it in some sense harder and in some sense easier. So in general, I would say you have these short-term writing projects and long-term writing projects. And the benefit of having short-term writing projects is that they can provide energy, momentum, and confidence. So this was also one of the reasons I decided to write blog posts, because I found the energy needed to write my thesis and to write papers so all-time consuming and so discouraging, because sometimes you could write a paper for about a year and still nothing would be done, or you would have to scrap the project entirely and start from scratch. Whereas writing blog posts, the nice thing about it is that you can start in the morning and the blog post can be finished in the evening. And maybe it's not the best work you've written, and maybe it's not the most inspiring or novel type of article, but it's at least a little indication that you still have the ability to put something out there. So that's why I definitely highly encourage you to have a short-term writing project as well as a long-term writing project. And you don't necessarily have to put it on the internet. Something short-term that you can write is also just to journal every day. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have these really long-term writing projects. So for me, the biggest writing project I most definitely had was the thesis. And although my thesis was combined of different articles, in some sense, it is a work I've created over 4 dedicated years. And the biggest challenge, I think, in these longer-term writing projects is to stay motivated for a longer period of time, but also to structure this work such that the beginning and the ending almost combines into one solid piece of work. And I think through writing a project for such a long period of time, I've definitely learned a lot on how to structure a big writing piece like this, and also how to keep motivated. And what I said before, the biggest thing for me is to have these dedicated moments where I would write 500 words. And for recreating the structure, I will talk a little bit about that later in the video in writing techniques. But in general, I would say having short and long-term writing projects is really good to increase your ability to write different types of pieces of writing. So the third thing I want to talk about is writing strategies. So these are really dedicated advice or very clear things that you can implement for your own writing. I also have created a list of writing courses and books that I've followed that you can look down below. And most of these writing courses you can audit for free, for example, on Coursera. And some of them are really good, some of them are not so good, and it's hard to say which of them I got the most value out of. But throughout the PhD, I followed most of these courses and read most of these books on writing. So if you really want to elaborate on your own writing techniques, definitely check out those resources that I've curated for you. So the biggest thing that I've learned through these courses is to think before you write. And this may sound so silly, but I think a lot of us, especially for papers, just start writing and halfway through we realize that we don't really know the goal of our writing or the main message that we want to convey. So the main question you have to ask for every piece of writing, and definitely for academic pieces, is what should the reader take away from my text? So what is the main message, main conclusion, main thing that you want to convey? And some things that can help you find this out is something that I would do often with academic texts, is that I would have a presentation that gave the structure for the academic text already. And I usually created these presentations as I was writing or working on a paper. But I think in general, just having a clear outline for your text really helps. I mean, it's such common advice, but it really does help. Something else that I've used a lot as well myself is the idea of reverse outlining. So reverse outlining is something that you do after you've written a piece of text, but you still find that it doesn't flow so well. So something that you do is you create an outline from an existing document by summarizing the main idea of each paragraph or section and clarify its structure and organization. So you would look at each paragraph and you would like kind of take out the main message, and then you see by just looking at these main messages of each paragraph, does the text still make sense to you? And I quite often found that through doing this, I realized that I had to swap paragraphs around, or that a certain paragraph didn't have a main message and I would kind of have to rewrite that paragraph. So that works really well for academic texts. Some other questions to ask while you are writing a piece of work is, how does the text flow? Is it clear how one idea connects to the next? Are there gaps in the logic? Are you missing information? Who is it aimed at? How is the organization, etc.? And I think all of these types of questions can make your work a lot better. And finally, something to also help improve your writing, which is not a writing strategy, but is reading. I won't talk about it too much. I'm thinking about creating a dedicated video on reading, but it's just reading more. I think the more you read, the better you become at writing as well. And something to do as well is like this idea of active reading. So during your reading, if you find examples of good writing or something that really inspires you, note it down. So have like a dedicated journal, or in your Kindle, you can just have the notes you've taken from books as a list, and you can see how other writers structure a piece of text. And I think often writers that I really like have said that they do this as well. They follow writers that they like and take little techniques from writers that they like, and definitely learn from other artists in that sense. So the fourth bit I want to talk about are some common pitfalls and challenges that I've noticed myself during writing that, I will give you some tips of how I overcame these, but some of them are still definitely there. And I think some of them are just part of the process of writing. So definitely you're not alone if you have any of these pitfalls or challenges. One of the things is motivation and discipline. I think often people say like, you need to write when you feel motivated to write or something along those lines. But I definitely have to say, in the last months of my PhD, for example, I just didn't feel like writing. I almost never woke up any day being like, oh, I feel so excited to write. And at a certain point, I just acknowledged that I will never feel like writing at those last bits, because I think I was just very stressed, and that was just part of the thesis, to be very honest. But I think at those moments, just to repeat that I will never feel like it, but once I start, I will get into the momentum almost, really helped. So I think the feeling for writing or motivation for writing can be really intangible, and it's quite unclear when you will feel like it. So I think it's just better to just start at those moments. The next common pitfall for me, at least, was definitely self-doubt and perfectionism. So especially at the end of the PhD, again, I felt this this, for the first time, I think, in my life almost, but this really in sense of perfectionism. Like, I really wanted the thesis to be perfect, but also something that I realized was some of the work I've written 4 years ago was just not perfect. It was just not up to my standard at that point anymore. But I also didn't really have the time to change it. And I think sometimes you just don't have to fret or be ashamed about what you've written in the past. It just shows how much you've grown over the years and how much better you've become as a writer. And a quote that I really liked was from Brenda Uland, who said, "Don't fret or be ashamed of what you've written in the past. It is so conceited and timid to be ashamed of one's mistakes. Of course they are mistakes, go on to the next." And I think this is really beautifully said, and also the idea that just keep on making mistakes and you'll get better, and it's okay to have bits of writing that are not perfect. I think if you look at some of the earlier works of even your favorite writers, it may not be as good as their current work, and that just shows that they've grown as a writer. And also something that I've definitely recognized is that sometimes we can recognize quality, but we cannot produce it yet, and that is just a lack of practice, and that can only be resolved by practicing more, so writing more and getting over the fact that the quality is not there yet. Lastly, another very common pitfall that I also had definitely at the beginning of the PhD or thesis writing is the art of practice and feedback. So I think something that's really valuable is to have someone that can provide you with feedback throughout your writing process. And this can be, in my case, it was my professor and some of my fellow peers, but it can also be a friend that you think is a good feedback giver or a fellow writer that you like their writing of, and to have regular feedback loops for your writing, because the only way you can get better, I think, is if you get feedback. And something to really keep in mind, and something that I've noticed, is that first change it before you judge it. So we all have the tendency to kind of become attached to our writing and think our writing is some of the best in the world. However, to give criticism a fair chance is to change the text first, and afterwards, after you've changed it, to see if you like it better. Because quite often we are a little bit hesitant to change our text, even if we see the criticism, and we quite often also don't agree with the criticism, or maybe that's just me. But after I've changed the text, I often see like, oh yeah, actually it made a lot of sense and the text is a lot better now. So I would definitely advise you to first change it, see if it's better, and if it's not better, you can always revert back to the original text. But that's the only way, I think, to give criticism a fair chance. So finally, embrace your writing journey. So all of us have different writing habits, writing techniques. Some of us are morning writers, others are write in little spurts, and I think that's okay. So writing in general is about consistency, finding small routines, and committing to improvements. So doing something small every day to keep the momentum of writing is the most important. Something that you can already do is start thinking about your writing routine really helps you, which environment inspires you to write. Maybe set a 30-day writing challenge if you're writing a big project. So think about, do I want to write 500 words every day, and maybe note it down in a calendar. That really helped me. Look at the list of writing resources that I put down below and see if some of them help you. And in general, as Stephen King said, if you want to be a writer, you must do two things above all others: read a lot and write a lot. And that's kind of what I want to end on. Let me know if there are any tips that you have for writing that could help me. Let me know if there's something that always distracts you from writing. I think I would love to commiserate together over writing distractions. And yeah, hopefully you become a better writer through this video, and see you next time. Bye!